Welcome to the Explainer. So today we're digging into a pretty huge mystery. Think about it. Billions of dollars, millions of hours, all poured into business and management research every single year. But does any of that actually trickle down and make our work lives any better? We all kind of assume there's this straight line, right? A new study comes out on leadership or motivation, and poof, it leads to better policies in our offices. Well, a team of researchers decided to actually test that assumption. And what they found, well, it's pretty shocking. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the disconnected world of research, then follow the great policy search, uncover a really shocking discovery, figure out why this gap even exists, and finally, look at a blueprint for how we might actually fix it. So, if you want answers, you got to have data, right? And that's exactly what this research team did. They launched this absolutely massive review to see just how much of all that academic research actually turns into real, usable guidance for organizations. And when I say massive, I mean massive. This was no casual glance. We're talking to over 4,000 articles from the 10 most influential journals, spanning an entire decade. I mean, they went straight to the top, to what's supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of management research.
Okay, but before we get to the big reveal, we really need to understand what they were looking for. See, they weren't just searching for any old tip or piece of advice. No, they were hunting for something much bigger, something with the power to create real, systemic change. And to do that, they had to define a really key term.
So for them, a policy wasn't just a simple suggestion. It was a foundational governance principle. You can almost think of it like an organization's DNA, It's the core code that shapes literally everything else. They were looking for ways to change the entire system, not just one little behavior. And this is a really important distinction. See, most research gives what you'd call practice advice, specific tips for managers. But these researchers were looking for policy advice, the actual rules that guide all the practice. I love this analogy. It's the difference between giving someone a tip on how to merge in traffic versus designing the entire highway system to improve the flow. They were looking for the highway designers.
So to find these policy gems, they had to sift through everything with this super rigorous filter. They started with those 4,000 plus articles and just systematically narrowed it down and down and down until they were left with only the data-driven studies that had real system-level implications. And out of all those thousands, the final count was just 61.
All right, so this is it. This is the moment the whole investigation was building toward. After all that work, after digging through a decade of research from the best and brightest minds, what did they actually find? You might want to brace yourself for this.
Just remember the scale here. We're talking 10 of the top journals, a full decade of work, thousands upon thousands of studies from the most respected people in their fields. This is the exact research that is supposed to be guiding how our workplaces operate.
1.5%. That's it. Let me say that again. 1.5%. That is the tiny fraction of articles in the world's leading management journals that had any kind of policy implication at all. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That means 98.5% of the most prestigious research had absolutely nothing to say about the actual rules that govern our workplaces. The researchers themselves warned that the whole field is at risk of becoming, and this is a quote, societally irrelevant. It's just a staggering disconnect. But the story doesn't end there. The researchers didn't just stop and, throw their hands up. They did what good researchers do. They kept digging. They drilled down into that tiny 1.5% to figure out what was going on. Where were these few rare policy ideas actually coming from? What they found was that the few insights that did exist were all bunched up in just 3 main areas: labor relations, leadership, and training. Now, don't get me wrong, those are important topics, but that's an incredibly narrow slice of what makes up the modern workplace, isn't it? But what was maybe even more revealing were the policy deserts they found. These are entire fields of study that had zero policy implications over 10 years. Things like stress and well-being, how urgent is that topic today, had none. Same for crucial areas like creativity and negotiation. Just nothing. It's a massive, massive blind spot. So you might be wondering, what does one of these good policy implications even look like? Well, here's one of the rare gems they actually found. It suggests a really clear, actionable shift. Instead of a policy of strict pay secrecy, maybe adopt a policy of partial openness.
See, that's the kind of concrete system-level guidance that was almost completely missing everywhere else.
Okay, so this all leads to the big question, right? Why? Why is the world of academic research so disconnected from the world of actual policy? And it's important to say, this isn't about blaming any one researcher. The study pointed to three powerful systemic reasons that are creating and, frankly, reinforcing this whole gap. Basically, it all boils down to a systemic problem. First, the theories that get the most praise in academia are often super abstract and not really tied to policy. Second, PhD students, the next generation of researchers, aren't really trained to think this way. And third, the top journals just don't require or reward authors for including policy guidance. So it becomes this self-reinforcing cycle that keeps research locked in an academic bubble. But hey, the point of this whole study wasn't just to complain about the problem. It was about finding a way forward. The authors didn't just diagnose the illness, they actually wrote a prescription. So let's take a look at the blueprint they came up with to try and make research relevant again.
Their 6-point plan is basically a total redesign of how research gets done. It's about starting studies with policy goals right from the get-go. It's about looking at huge bodies of work, not just single, isolated studies. It's about intentionally focusing on those policy deserts we talked about. And maybe most important of all, it redefines what success even looks like. It's not just about helping a company's bottom line, but about benefiting employees and society as a whole.
When you get right down to it, good intentions just aren't going to cut it. If we want research that actually changes the world, we have to change the incentives for the people doing the research. The whole system, from how we train PhDs to what the top journals publish, has to be rebuilt to actually reward real-world relevance. And that really leaves us with a powerful final thought, doesn't it? Just think about the biggest challenges we face at work today: burnout, inequality, that constant struggle for work-life balance. What could we actually solve if the full power of all this research was focused on creating better policies? What if that tiny 1.5% became, say, 50%? The potential is just enormous. And thanks to this work, we at least have a clearer map of how to get there.